In this video, we're going to go over a list of functional groups that you need to know for organic chemistry. So let's get started. Whenever you have carbons that are all single bonded to one another, this is going to be called an alkane. This is the simplest functional group. If there is at least one double bond between any of the carbons, this is going to be called an alkene. And if you have a situation where you have triple bonds between at least one of the carbons, this is going to be called an alkyne. And then I'm going to move everything to the left to show you more. Whenever you have carbons that are forming a ring, this is going to be called a cycloalkane. And whenever that ring has this characteristic look to it, when you have 6 carbons in the ring with 3 double bonds, this is going to be called an aromatic. It's sometimes called an arene, but this thing is just a benzene. That's what you need to know. So these are all the hydrocarbons, or compounds that contain only carbon and hydrogen. So now if you have any hydrocarbon chain that is going to be attached to halogens, you have what's called a haloalkane. So these are called haloalkanes, or they're also called alkyl halides. Now the halogens you can have, if you want to write them out, they're on 7A of the periodic table: fluorine, chlorine, bromine, and iodine. Now, whenever you have a carbon chain that is attached to an oxygen, and then the oxygen connects to other carbons, this is going to be called an ether. And ethers can also look like this. They can look like a substituent, so they can be like this. This is an ether. And then they can also look like this. That's also an ether. Now, whenever you have a carbon chain and you have groups of OH attached, if you at least have one of these, this group is called a hydroxy, and it creates a functional group called an alcohol. So alcohols are carbon chains that have OHs attached to them. Now let's talk about ketones and aldehydes. On top where I've drawn is a ketone, which is an example of a ketone, and on the bottom is an aldehyde. A ketone is going to be an oxygen, which is double bonded to a carbon, and then this carbon is going to be attached to 2 other carbons. That's what makes a ketone. What sets an aldehyde apart from the ketone is that, as opposed to being attached to 2 carbons, it's going to be attached to 1 carbon and 1 hydrogen. So that's an aldehyde. If you want to ever see it written out, aldehyde is going to be CHO, and ketone is usually going to be CO. Now let's talk about a carboxylic acid. So this right here is a carboxylic acid. A carboxylic acid is an oxygen which is double bonded to a carbon, and that carbon connects to another carbon and an OH. And if you ever seen it written out, it's going to look like COOH, and this is called, I forgot to write it, but carboxylic acid. Now let's talk about this functional group. Whenever you have this situation where you have an oxygen double bonded to a carbon, and then this carbon attaches to R, which is either a carbon or a hydrogen, and then it also attaches to an oxygen which attaches to other carbons. This is called an ester. And an ester written out sometimes will be COOC in letters. If you ever see an NH2 group, this is going to be called an amine. So it's simply NH2. Now, before you think the whole thing with oxygen double bonded to carbon is over, let me introduce you to amides. An amide is when you have an oxygen double bond to a carbon, and this carbon usually attaches either to carbons or hydrogens, which is what the R means, and then you have an NH2 group at another end. So that was an amide. Now, if you ever see carbon triple bonded to nitrogen, this is going to be called a nitrile. And then let's go over our last example. If you ever see a carbon chain that is going to be attached to SH, this is going to be called a thiol, and it can also look like this. It can be at the end of it, it can be in the middle of it, like that. But SH, the S is a sulfur, and the H is obviously hydrogen. So that's a thiol. So those are some common functional groups you should know for organic chemistry. And yes, you should memorize these. They're going to be pretty important in your classes. Thank you for watching.